Is the SEC sticking with 8 games in the conference schedule after 2023, or will they vote at the spring meetings in Destin to move to 9 games? And if so, what all else will that entail? Now, both SI's Ross Dellenger and the Athletics' Seth Emerson have reported on this in the past week, and the decision appears to be about as clear as mud right now. Greg Sankey has stated for about a month now that the decision will likely be made at this month's spring meetings in Destin, which is actually going to include Texas and Oklahoma in attendance for the first time. Emerson detailed the decision that the 16 schools have to vote on. For a year now, and this is a quote from his article, the conference has been down to 2 options: a 9-game conference schedule where every team has 3 annual opponents and rotates the other 12 teams, or an 8-game schedule where everyone has 1 annual opponent. No more divisions, no pods. The 9-game conference schedule made sense because you get more annual conference rivalries every year. You can have Alabama versus Auburn, and you can have both Alabama, Tennessee, and Auburn, Georgia. Big ratings games each year. If you stay at 8 games, Alabama, Tennessee, and Auburn, Georgia end up being played 2 times every 4 years. Personally, I think going with 8 games, like splitting it up and getting that break in between, at least for the every year games, I think that would make them a little more fresh. Like having 7 different opponents every 2 years would kind of be must-see TV. But truth be told, for TV purposes, 9 conference games is the right decision. You get more of the bigger annual matchups, which get the better ratings guaranteed. If you want to keep your distribution partner happy, this is the way to do it. Everyone kind of assumed that this thing was just going to move to 9 games like the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. But as Emerson put in his article, when everyone met at last year's spring meetings, they realized that they did not have a consensus on this. From the article, it said schools such as Kentucky preferred 8-game schedules because they don't care about more than 1 annual rivalry. Their big rival is Louisville, and it's a non-conference game. And they liked 8-game conference schedules for competitive and financial reasons. 1 fewer non-conference game means 1 fewer chance to schedule a very winnable home game. These are all viable reasons, but when it comes to the greater good of the conference, you could probably tell Kentucky to just suck it up, buttercup, right? But I don't think it's that easy. At that time, we weren't sure if the CFP was expanding. We know that now. The SEC was not sure who was going to pay for canceling non-conference games that have already been scheduled well out in the future. And the biggest one, whether or not ESPN was even going to pay them more money for more games. Like the ESPN SEC contract is for 8 SEC conference games each season for each team. That ESPN contract was worth $811 million per year for 10 years. And it was signed prior to the Oklahoma and Texas joining of the conference. The pro rata clause in the contract is believed to increase the payment by an amount equal to what each school was already getting. So around $58 million per school, which means $927 million per year. But the SEC and ESPN are basically still at the negotiating table because, as the SEC has already pointed out to ESPN, this is not just 2 extra teams. This isn't the Big Ten adding Rutgers and Maryland. This is Texas and Oklahoma. This is 2 of the premier brands in the history of the sport, which means more marquee matchups, much, much bigger games. But ESPN has not announced a new deal yet, which means right now there's no additional money for more games. There's no additional money for bringing in Texas and Oklahoma, really. If you're the SEC, why would you play more conference games if you're not going to make more money off of it? Aside from getting Texas, Texas A&M, and Alabama, Tennessee every year, like what else could ESPN be asking for? Like, would they want an agreement that even with 9 games, the conference teams are all required to play 1 P5 non-conference game? That ESPN gets to set the matchups? Like, I'm not sure what else ESPN could want and whether or not the SEC would even be willing to do that. So now, if you're a school that's been planning to vote for non-conference games, but now there's no financial incentive to replace the extra home game that you're likely to lose every other year, in a 4-5 conference schedule, or 4 home and 5 away conference schedule, like do you switch your vote back to 8? Like, my belief is that something is going to get done, but not at the spring meetings. ESPN and the SEC will agree on 9 games eventually, but as we've talked about in the Pac-12 negotiations, ESPN, they're a little dry on cash at the moment. I mean, they're not making cuts, or they are making cuts. They're not spending a ton of money. There's the CFP, NBA, and UFC deals coming up that they're going to have to spend on. So are they just going to say, nah, we're good with what we got? who's to say? But if ESPN says that they're paying more or they're not paying more, I think you're going to see 8 games. If ESPN says yes, then we're going to see 9. But nothing's going to be agreed to until that point. Thanks for listening to Winning Cures Everything. Make sure and follow me on Twitter @GaryWCE. If you want to toss in a question, you can email me Gary@winningcureseverything.com. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.